We'll give everyone just another quick second to join. And as we get started, we will be recording this session. So if you guys miss anything or want to rewatch after, we will have that available on YouTube. If you have any questions as we're going through, just feel free to drop in Q&A or in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on both. And like I said, we will have the video available on YouTube after, so you can rewatch it or share it with anyone who misses the webinar, and we will send it via email. So definitely stay tuned there. Cool. Well, as you can see, we've got Patrick, Carly, and Sammie with us from UX Writers Collective. So Patrick is the co-founder and co-CEO and former lead digital copywriter at MYOB. And then we have Carly, who is the UX Writers Collective instructor and a senior UX writer. And you may have seen Carly in our content design for AR/VR webinar. And then we have Sammie with us, who is also a UX WC instructor and a UX writer at Condé Nast. So we will be showing you how to use Figma today, a very quick overview and an introduction to Figma. Then we'll be doing some practice work and followed by Q&A. So we are super excited to kick things off. And with that, I will give it to Patrick to intro Figma.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Really excited for everyone to be here and to delve into Figma a little bit. Before we get into the practical side of today, which is going to take up the most time, we just wanted to give a quick introduction to Figma and just cover off, like, what's the point of even learning it in the first place? Because there are often questions when you're learning a new tool or a new skill, like how much are you actually going to use it and what's the actual benefit? When it comes to learning Figma, I personally believe, and I think the rest of the team would agree, it's probably one of the key skills you can learn as a content designer. And the reason that's true is because in previous versions of design software, say Sketch or Adobe XD, but particularly Sketch, I wouldn't go so far as to use the word gatekeeping, but it was very hard for content designers to become a part of the design process. And that's because often software is desktop based. There's really no connectivity. You're not working in real time. Figma, and I should say, Figma isn't paying us to do this webinar. This isn't an ad. We're doing this because it's becoming an industry standard. Figma is online, it's in real time, and collaboration is built into the software, which makes it extremely easy, easier than ever before, for content designers, UX writers to actually go into designs and update the copy in real time. That's a huge benefit because it means that there aren't multiple different docs floating around. You don't have to control version history very carefully because it's all baked in. There's no risk of things being lost in translation. And one of the huge benefits then is UX writers and content designers become a more integral part of the design process. So that's a huge benefit for learning Figma. It just makes it so much easier for you to dive in and do the work where the designers are working, so everyone's in the one space. So if we're talking about the benefits of learning Figma, we've listed a number here that I've just mentioned. You're contributing content to designs, you're collaborating across teams. We're going to show you today how to collaborate, leaving comments and so on, integrating copy with design. And I know anecdotally, listening to people in design teams and UX writers in design teams, once UX writers and content designers can actually go into a Figma file and update the copy, all of a sudden, designers see the importance of the copy and allowing writers to come into the design file itself. So it's a huge benefit, not only for you, but for them as well. It really democratizes the design process. So if you do learn how to use Figma, and you don't even need to be a pro at Figma, even just some basic Figma skills like we'll go over today, you're developing an in-demand skill set, and you're going to be able to stand out to a hiring manager. So if you're in an interview and they're asking you how much experience do you have in Figma, if you say, oh, I'm able to edit text, I can, create frames, I can basically create, a basic wireframe or a prototype in Figma, you're going to stand out, and it's quickly becoming an industry standard. One of the great benefits of Figma, of course, is that you don't have to split prototyping across multiple different types of software, which is one of the disadvantages of using a desktop-based product, is that you have to create a design in one and then move to another to create a prototype for testing. Figma does all of that from end to end, so you don't have to jump around into different products. And lastly, but not least, there's a huge plugin library for Figma, which allows you to just add heaps of different features, and quite powerful features, actually, including there are some that will let you manipulate and store text. So, for example, plugins like Ditto and Strings and Frontitude, these are becoming much more popular in order to make sure that you can standardize copy across different components. For instance, if you were to say wanted to make all of your CTAs consistent, a plugin that helps you manage copy across different designs will allow you to do that. So it really allows you to scale appropriately. So why is Figma, what are some advantages Figma has over other pieces of software like Sketch and Adobe XD? So particularly with Sketch, Sketch has been an industry standard for a long time, and it is a very powerful piece of software. It's very good, and it's robust. There are a couple of disadvantages. So the first is that it's only on Macs and it's desktop based. So number one, you've got a lot of people there who aren't able to access it. And number two, collaboration can really be a problem. And often when designers use Sketch, they often use another tool called Abstract in order to manage version history. And that can become quite complicated. So it can be quite hard for people to get into those design files and help collaborate. Now, Adobe XD it's also an online-based product, so similar to Figma. However, the collaboration is a little bit spread out. So you make your designs in one area, but you're commenting and sharing in another. And so the collaboration isn't as baked in as it is with Figma, which we'll show you today. So if you're using Figma, it really is becoming the standard to work on designs together and share that information all in one place. And as I mentioned, there are a number of different plugins for UX writers and content designers. Ditto and Strings becoming the most popular. And of course, even just basic tools like spell checking. There are a number of different spell checking tools. This Spell is a really good one. I'm a really big fan of HTML to Figma, which is where you can just take a screenshot of a website, or rather an image of a website's HTML. You import that into Figma, and it puts the designs right there for you into layers, so you can start manipulating it. It's great if you want to create something in your portfolio where you take an existing design, but you want to suggest changes to it. That's a great way to get started. And then a tool like Wireframe is great as well, because you can just get started with creating quick wireframes. So we'll go a little bit into the basics of Figma today, but if after today you want to experiment with some of these plugins on your own, please go ahead and do so, because the more you work with them and the more you understand how to use them, then the more powerful Figma user you're going to be. And ultimately, you're going to be more attractive to hiring managers and design teams. So that's just a little bit of the intro to Figma, and we wanted to get that right out of the way because we want to delve straight into the practice. So today our practice session is going to be divided up into 3 sections. So we're going to talk about some of the basics, we're going to talk about some more advanced features, and then we're going to talk about collaboration and how to collaborate across teams in Figma. And I believe we're going to start off with Carly, who's going to go over some of the basics. So Carly, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Yes, I will start sharing my screen. And I know this might be a familiar narrative to a lot of people as content designers, UX writers, and I think Patrick alluded to this as well. But getting access to your first design file as a UX writer, and so much pressure you put on yourself being like, I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to mess up this opportunity. So I'm happy to share some things that I've learned, as I don't have a visual design background. I had everything I know is self-taught and through video tutorials and on the job learning. So I'm happy to share the knowledge, and don't worry, you're not alone in that fear. So this is what Figma will look like when you open it for the first time, and it'll sort of default to this recent files view. So you can see I have the file we'll be working on today for our webinar, but there are also some Figma stock files that are included as kind of like some extra onboarding stuff. So if you did, after this session, want to experiment, those will be available to you once you create an account. So let's get into our practice file. And hopefully when you open a file for the first time, it'll default to this working area. But you can see the one thing you'll notice is as I'm scrolling, it is one big infinite space of scrolling. So I'm using my trackpad, so it can be really easy to get lost once you open a file. So a good thing to keep in mind is if you do find it hard to get back to where you were working, there are a lot of different keyboard shortcuts you can use. So I'm going to go to this help and resources section, go to the keyboard shortcuts, and they're all organized in this sort of categories of what you want to do. And for this issue, I really want to just snap back to that working area. So you can see I've used some of these already. Those are highlighted in blue. And this one is the one that you'll probably find the most useful for this particular problem. So I'm going to press Shift and 2. And there I am back in my working area. And because I'm on Mac, some of the keyboard shortcuts might be a bit different, but I encourage you just to check that out and see what works for you and your working style. The other thing I mentioned is I am using a trackpad, but I know on some computers that can be difficult to, if you're not on a Mac or don't have a trackpad, it can be difficult to scroll. So there is a hand tool up here that you can use to pan and move across the screen. And when you do pan and move across on the actual design work, you're not moving anything around when you use this hand tool. So as opposed, if I use the cursor, that's just selecting things. So that's another way you can sort of just move around the file without affecting anything. Now let's get into this big layers panel here. And I think this is really the key area where you'll be doing a lot of discovery into what's happening in the design, like where certain text layers are. And you'll notice that everything begins with a frame. So this is a frame, it is your working area. If you're familiar with Photoshop or other design tools, this would also be called an artboard, but in Figma, it is a frame. So you can expand the frame to see the different kinds of layers that are within it by clicking this twisty. And here you'll see there's a bunch of different groups. So we have a send button, open button, and within these, there are other layers as well. So you can group similar layers. These are all individual text pieces, and you can group them in a way that makes sense so you can better organize your files. So if I see, okay, so this is a message content type of thing, and all of these are like messages that people have sent to a recipient, I can sort of highlight these by pressing Shift and clicking, and then grouping them together. And then it just cleans up your layers. And to rename it, because by default, it just goes to group 1, you can double click. And maybe I want to say, I don't know, message content. And then there's a group. And when you hover over it, they're all pre-selected so you can move them around without needing to move them individually, which is really nice. All right, so that's groups. Now for layers. The thing about layers is the position and arrangement of where they are in a group is super important. So you can see this send button is made of a rectangle and some text, but the text actually isn't visible. So how can I make this visible in this design file? And you can do that by moving it up so it's above the rectangle and then there's the text. That is a very common thing that I've experienced in the past, is like I'll add a text layer and it's just not appearing in the design. And that's one way you can sort of troubleshoot something, an issue like that. And then when it comes to creating new frames, you can use this at the top. You can freehand it if you want. I'm just gonna delete that. Or if I press it again, I know I've run into this where I have to look up the dimensions if I'm designing for a mobile device, but there are some presets that you can use as well. So that's a handy feature. And next, I want to talk about sort of the meat and potatoes of what content designers and UXers would be concerned of, and that's how do we edit the text in the design. So it's not in this layers panel, but you can double click to edit things, or you can draw new text fields by using the T icon, just like Google Slides or other text box tools. It's the same thing. You can also hover over a text layer and press T on your keyboard to enter edit mode. So a few different ways you can do that. And you'll notice once I enter edit mode on a text layer, this design panel gets a bunch of new options. So I think we might go over this in some of the more advanced functionality of Figma, but for editing and changing and manipulating text, this text panel is really where you will be doing the most work. So you can manipulate the font, the weight, if you want it to be more bold or less bold or italic. You can also adjust the font size, so you can get really specific or use some of the presets. And I noticed that in this file, if I go to this text layer, the capitalization is fairly different than what's in the layers panel. So you can see it's using title case and then it's appearing as all caps. And when I try and correct it manually, it's still coming up as all caps. So if we go to this design panel, another way you can troubleshoot if you're experiencing something like this is to highlight that text and see the more options in the text panel. And there is a section, in addition to like all these extra alignment settings, there is a section for casing. So it's automatically to all caps here. And if I want to change that to title case, I just click this and it's instantly fixed.
I have a quick question, or two questions actually, Carly, or for the group. Larry was asking how these text fields would look when using a plugin like Ditto or Strings. I don't know if anyone has any experience or thoughts there.
So with a plugin like that, with a plugin like Ditto, for instance, everything will look the same. The way that a plugin like that works is that there will often be a separate portal where you can edit your text, and then it'll update in the Figma file. But I'll actually show that a little later on, so we'll get a snapshot of that later on in the webinar.
Great. And then just one more quick question. Sorry, Carly. Roxanne was saying framing is their nemesis. Is cleaning up the file architecture its only benefit? I find it's harder to manipulate the design using frames. So any other benefits to using frames in the design?
I think, yeah, organization is key. But once we get to, I think we're doing a section on prototyping, that'll be super important for not only organization, but making sure that all your scenarios are captured. So we only have one screen here, but if you have a really complex flow, it's difficult to label if you're just using shapes or other different visual ways of designing in Figma. If you're not using frames, it can be difficult to know what screen is going where and to make sure those prototype actions are going to the right frame. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anyone else wants to add on to that. Okay, great. I actually, that's the basics of what I wanted to touch on for text. It's similar to some of the cursor actions I was going over before, but you can resize things manually. But if you did want to say you're working really closely with a designer and they say, all of our buttons need to be 60 pixels high. So you can actually adjust that manually in this section. And then it's very subtle, but it did make a change there. And another way you can sort of take your, if you're doing some basic wireframing and you're not sure about like some good button styling, I always like to round my corners for my buttons. So if I put like maybe a 10% rounding, I just think it looks a lot more professional and polished. So that's another way you can sort of use that design panel to take something super basic like a rectangle and just make it a bit more professional. But I think that's all the basics. If there's no other questions, I can pass it off to Sammie to go over some more advanced features.
I have one more question on the fonts. Somebody said, do all fonts work on all OS? So on all operating systems, do all fonts work?
I would think that that depends. I know we didn't touch on in the original, in the Figma file browser, there is like this design system aspect. So you can load like different fonts, like say your company uses particular fonts for your organization, you can load those like through a design system file. But I think for the purpose of like a basic account, you can use whatever files are available to you. Like I think this is a Google font, but I'm not exactly sure if it supports all fonts if they're not installed on your computer.
Yeah, I think the general answer is you have to install them if you're looking for anything custom. And if you're on a Mac, as long as they're in your font library, you should be pretty good to go. Any other questions? Otherwise, I can run us through a few more hot tips on how to use Figma from a content design lens.
Yeah, let's keep going and we'll cover more questions as we go.
Great. I am going to share the same screen here and we'll use the same fundamentals exercise as a basic example for us. And what I'm going to do is get into shapes a little bit. So this is definitely more of the territory for designers, but I think it comes in handy for us to know as well in case you want to convey something different, maybe an alternative to the design. And I also use them for sticky notes. So sometimes I don't want to rely on commenting, which is right up here where you're able to leave one comment at a time. Sometimes I want to expand on something or keep it as a note right on the screen. So I'll create a little sticky note for myself. So that's a good example of making a shape. So to do that, I'll use this upper toolbar or the shortcut R right on your keyboard to make a rectangle. So really easy to remember. You can always use the drop down and change the shape up here. I find I use rectangles honestly the most more than anything else. And from there, as soon as you click that R or use the toolbar up here, you can just drag and drop the shape you're looking for. So I'll go a little bit large for this screen just to give an idea. I zoom in using the trackpad as well, just zooming in and out. And then to start making this look a little bit more like a sticky note, I'll use this right-hand panel. Like Carly mentioned, anything once you're clicking on an object, whether it's text or a rectangle, everything will appear on this right-hand side. So for me, I'll come over to this fill section, which is where you will start to see any kind of color you want to choose from. You can type in a hex code if you have something in particular. Usually I just try to find something that looks like a slightly less overwhelming post-it note. And from there, I'll start to add text to the rectangle. So to do that again, you can use the toolbar up here, or you can click T on your keyboard for text and then start entering it. To type it in, again, it'll take shape however it fits across the screen. So if I start typing, this is a sticky note, here you go. It'll go outside of the bounds of the rectangle just because they're not connected. So one way I like to fix that is to come back over here to this right-hand panel and come over to the alignment section and click the square. That will make sure it sticks to one specific shape. And I'll make that shape a little bit smaller than the sticky note itself. So now when I type, it'll always fit right within the post-it note. Sometimes I make a heading for them and then I'll copy and paste the same shape, same thing, just using Command C and Command V if you're on a Mac, and then create a body text as well. Figma just introduced a really nice feature, which is bullet points. You can find them, they're a little bit hidden, but if you come to this side menu over here and click more, you're able to see different list styles. So this is something I really like to use. It just keeps things a little bit more organized. So I'll say idea 1, idea 2, 3. And basically it'll already make some of those text patterns that you like using in Google Docs right here for you. Now, when you're creating a shape, everything is pretty disconnected. You could move this right off of the post-it note you created. So one way around that is to drag your cursor around the entire item, so both the text and the rectangle, and right-click. That will give you this extra menu that is all about aligning and distributing the two items that you have grouped together. So for this one, I'm just going to click Group Selection, and now you'll be able to move that shape wherever you'd like. And if you do Command C and Command V, you can create multiple post-it notes. So I use these all the time. If you want to make them a little bit fancier, something I suggest is going back to this right-hand panel and clicking Effects and creating a drop shadow. I use this for buttons as well. It kind of gives it that 2D effect. So that's something I like to do when I'm creating my own design, just so things stand out. It's also great for portfolio pieces. It really makes it pop off of a page. Something else from here that I often find myself doing is blurring text. So as a UX writer, sometimes I like to show what the absence of text looks like, and there's a really easy way to do that in Figma as well. So for that, I usually just grab the piece of text I'd like to blur, come again back down to this effects panel, and in the drop down, click layer blur. So this is a really easy way to show, there is text here. We're not using lorem ipsum, but we're trying to show, what something could look like if we're mocking it up. I find this one pretty helpful. From there, let's go into, like I mentioned, really great for portfolio pieces if you want to include something from Figma. One way to do that, again, to make it stand off the page is through that nice background effect. Another thing you can do is create a page for yourself where you're either using it as a copy sandbox, maybe a prototype page. Sometimes for user research, we create separate pages. And again, for portfolio pieces, that's something I do as well. So to do that, I'll come over to this left-hand panel, click Add a New Page. Sometimes this can be a little bit lost if you're in the layering section, so you might see a lot of this material and this kind of content. You can just drag this down. And then if you're in a very large file, all of this will be filled in with different pages. So from here, you can just name these really easily by double clicking. I'll say Copy Sandbox. For this one, I'll name the next one Portfolio Piece, or maybe Before After, which is something I often do. You can come back to this screen and grab everything you'd like, again, by dragging and dropping, or using the keyboard shortcut, whatever computer you're on, Command A for Mac, to grab everything within that artboard. Command C again, go back over to your portfolio piece, and then you have everything you need to know right here. So from there, let's go into exporting a little bit and what you might find to actually put this within your portfolio, or just to get that mock-up if you want to send it to a stakeholder outside of Figma. You can grab a frame just by clicking on the name of that frame. That's this piece right up here, or any kind of group, anything you create. And again, go back right over to this right-hand panel and export. You'll see right here at the bottom. If you want to do more than one piece at a time, same thing, drag and drop everything you have, come over to this right-hand portal and click export. So from here, let me click it, there we go. You'll see the amount of layers or items that you grabbed, so 1, 2, 3, and different ways that you can download it. This will go right to your desktop as soon as you click export, so this is a really handy way to add anything you'd want, get it outside of Figma and up into the cloud or wherever else you want to keep it. Let me see if there's any questions coming in. Katie, anything over anything I covered?
Yeah, I did see some questions on, let's see. So questions on creating tables in Figma, which it looks like somebody helped answer in the chat. So thank you, Kevin. And then, let's see. I know we just talked about exporting. We've got some questions coming in the QA. How do you export in one single PDF instead of 3 separate layer PDFs? So will this all go into one PDF?
For me personally, my experience is that's where frames come in handy again, if you want to create one large frame with everything on it. So again, that would be coming up here, capturing everything and making sure all of your pieces fit within that frame. and then from there exporting it so it's all kind of contained, if that answers the question.
And then we had another question. Are artboards automatic? Do you have to set artboards or does a page count as an artboard?
That's a good term. I think artboard is one of those terms that kind of came over from Sketch or from Photoshop tools, but Figma uses pages, so anything you want to create will be on this new page. It is very large, super infinite. When you create a frame that will fit somewhere on your page, groups are what groups items together, and then you have like your layers of text or shapes. So basically, artboard, I think, is sometimes used to refer to as the frame, coming from whatever other software a designer might be familiar with. But the overall gray space is really just the page itself. Yeah. I know that's a lot to cover, but I think a lot of different questions can be answered. Like if you're looking to say, oh, you know what, I don't remember how to blur text, I don't remember how to add that drop shadow, everything can be Googled, and Figma can really do so much. It's a pretty powerful tool. So my best advice, the way I learned very similarly to Carly, is when I'm looking to figure out how to do something, I just ask Google and find a video or 2 seconds that reminds me, this is the shortcut for that. And that's pretty easy. And then if you play around, you'll start to notice there's so much up here that will really save you time. I used to create a shape or a line for an arrow and another one for the length of the arrow until I realized there was something right in here that you could use, which is the actual arrow shape. So I think it just takes some time to find some of the more power user features, but you'll definitely get there over time. I will hand it over to Patrick.
Yeah, and I have a couple more questions, Patrick. We can maybe save for once you're done with your section. We've got
sounds
lots
good.
of good ones coming through in the chat. So if we haven't answered your question yet, we'll hopefully get to it in a bit.
Excellent. All right, now we're sharing. So as, by the way, can everyone see my screen? Wonderful. Look, as Sammie said, everything can be Googled. So if you're sitting here and going like, oh my goodness, like how am I going to remember all this? It's all good. Everything can be Googled. Everyone, and by the way, as content designers, you actually don't need to know how to do everything in Figma. Your main job will be manipulating and editing text. And that's really the main points you need to know. And so what we've covered here will definitely set you up well to do that. But as I mentioned at the beginning, Figma is really built for collaboration. And so it's really built in from the start. And so understanding how to collaborate with a design team will really, really help you. So one of the ways you can do that, and this is actually answering a question someone had in the chat, is about version history. So like what happens if someone's changed something or you've accidentally changed something, guilty, and you need to go back and find an older version. You can actually do that just like in a Google Doc by accessing the version history. So to access the version history, all you need to do is to go up here to the title of the file, and then literally just click on show version history, and then you'll be able to see all of the different versions and also who's made changes in that version. So I can see, yep, Sammie and Carly have made some changes here. So if I wanted to, I could go back, I could click on that, and then it'll update, and then it'll show me the older version. Obviously, that's an autosave, so it's not going to change much. But the further back we go, the more differences we're going to see. So if you happen to delete a frame or you've changed something and you really need to get it back quickly, don't worry, you can just go back into the version history and find everything you need to there. But the other thing about Figma is that it's really easy to share files. So literally all you need to do to share a file is to copy and paste the link and send it to someone and they can open it. Of course, that will only let a person see the file, but what happens if you want to make a file and actually share it with someone so they can edit it? Again, just like in something like a Google Doc, you can just go up to this share button and you can see, okay, who do I want to share this to? And then you can just add an email and then set their permissions and then send the invite. And again, if you have, you can set setting here for the link, so anyone with the link can see it or only people invited to the file. So you can just make sure that you're setting the privacy settings for however you would like. Another great element is that you can also link to a selected frame. So if you only want to show 1 or 2 frames or a specific part of a file, you can just click down there and you can do that as well. Okay. So one of the most popular features you'll probably be using is comments, and Figma makes it really easy to comment on other people's work. So let's say I'm a content designer and Sammie and Carly have worked on this and I'm going in for a review and I want to leave some comments there because I have some thoughts about the copy. It's really just as easy as going up to the toolbar here and pressing on the comment option, or you can literally just press the letter C. So just press the letter C and now you're in the comment view. And so all you need to do then is just click wherever you would like to leave a comment. So let's say I want to leave a comment on this button. Just click there. And then to tag someone, you just put @ and then you can choose their name. So let's say Carly made this button. So I'm going to put Carly's name here. That's @ and Carly. And then all I'm going to say is great job. Love this. You can also add an emoji if you want to be super happy. So there we go. So we've got, so there's one comment there, and I'm just going to add another one to show you what it looks like when we have multiple comments. So I'm going to comment on Sammie's post-it note here. I'm going to say, I'm going to tag her, and then say great ideas, and then post. Awesome. And now you can see if I turn the comment view off by pressing let's say V again to select the selector tool, those comments are gone. So it makes it really easy to switch between the design view where you don't have comments, and then you press C, and then those comments show up both in the right-hand side and then also with the numbers. So all you need to do is just click, and then super easy to see those different comments. So again, this is just a really great way for you to get into a design file and leave thoughts, as opposed to having to, if I know my personal experience is if I didn't have Sketch and someone shared, if I wanted to see a Sketch file, I'd have to go to someone's computer and look at it, and then we would have to talk about it. It's just so much easier to work asynchronously, where I can just look at a file in my own time, leave comments, just makes it so much easier.
Hey, Patrick, quick question on that. So let's say there's a stakeholder or someone without a Figma account. Are they able to leave comments, or what is that process?
Well, I don't know if they're able to leave comments without a Figma account. Sammie and Carly, you might be able to answer that. But Figma accounts are free. So I do know that you can certainly view Figma files without a comment, without the ability to comment. Sorry, you are able to view files without an account. So you don't need an account to actually view them. But Sammie or Carly, do you know if you can leave comments without an account? I'm actually not sure.
Yes, you can. Something that Figma is often used for is the prototyping feature. So that's another thing that someone can click on, see the entire screen. So it really depends what settings you're sharing. Just the designer will probably make sure they're either sharing from like the prototype itself, that kind of sharing setting, or the file. And when you share a file without editing privileges and just view, you'll have access to that hand to move around the page, commenting, and I believe just something else like the cursor or something. So they wouldn't be able to add or change anything, but they should be able to comment.
Excellent.
And then for prototype, you can't, but that's also like another formal view for someone.
Yeah. We're not going to delve too much into prototyping today, but as you can see here, there is the prototype option up in the top right-hand corner there. So if you feel curious about going into the prototyping feature after this webinar, it's right up there if you'd like to go check it out. So yeah, being able to share yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Patrick, do you mind zooming in on the screen just a little bit, because it's a little small?
Sorry,
No, you're fine. Perfect. Thank you.
My monitor is too big. Yeah, so being able to share a link without an account is one of the ways that Figma just helps democratize the design process. So you can easily just share a link with someone and say, hey, can you do a quick review of this? As opposed to having to download Sketch, which is, an expensive program. So in terms of collaborating with designers and content designers, it is really going to depend on your internal policies. Some designers don't want you to put text in immediately, or rather in their same design file. So you might want to duplicate a design file and then work on that instead. So the way you can do that is you can go to your drafts, excuse me, you can go back to your files, and then you can just right click on any file and duplicate it. And then once it's duplicated, it'll create a copy, and then you can go in there and then you can mess around in your own file with your own text, and then that's not going to affect the original file. However, the benefit of Figma is that you don't have to do that. You can go into your own file. The point of Figma is that you're working from one source of truth. So the idea is that, exactly as we've shown, we can go in, and if I wanted to change this copy, sorry, Carly, if I wanted to change this to continue, then I can. So I've just changed that. And of course, we've got that version history so that I can look that up at any time. Fewer variants are better. The single file is the best. But of course, when you've got multiple people working in a file, sometimes it can be interesting to see what they're doing, or if you're collaborating, you might want to watch how they're working on the file. So you might have noticed up here that I can see, by the way, I'll just zoom in again. There we go. You can see that we've got a couple of bubbles up here, a couple of circles, and those are the different people who are in the file. So I can see that actually Sammie is here. So I'm going to click on Sammie's circle here. And right now I'm observing Sammie. So I'm looking at everything she's doing. So if Sammie, if you wanted to create a shape or move something, I would be able to just watch exactly what she's doing. And the benefit of this, hi, the benefit of this is that if Sammie wants to take me through a design, she can point at exactly what she wants to point at and explain some changes she's made to me, or she can just take me through everything and I'm not going to get lost. So the same goes for you. So if you're presenting to someone, they can go in the file and you can get them to click on your profile, and then they'll be able to observe you as you're taking them through a different element. So I'm going to just jump back to my view. Now, we've had a couple of questions about copy specifically and sharing copy, because it's one thing to have copy in a frame or a group. It's another to make sure that there's consistency and it's documented and so on. And that's where some interesting plugins might come in handy. So I've actually installed Ditto in this on my account. So if you wanted to access your plugins, you would go here, you would go to the top left-hand corner, and then you would go down to plugins. And then you can access a number of different plugins here. And you can go to browse plugins and community if you wanted to add more. And I'm just going to use Ditto as an example. If you are looking for a way to manage your copy, Ditto is a really good example. And it's going to run and open here. So once you get it set up, you can actually, for some reason it hasn't connected. Let's see if we can connect it here live in real time. So I want to import that to Ditto. Great. So the way that Ditto works is that if I want to select a frame or any piece of text, I can, let's say I want to click on this button text here. So I can go to selected, and it's already brought up the component here. And I can put a status on it. I can say this is work in progress, and you can actually put notes on it and say, please don't edit this. And you can actually put tags there. And better yet, you can also use components. So if we wanted to make sure that all of our CTA text was the same, for instance, and we wanted to make sure that whenever we have a button, we have the same text, we can actually create a component. Now, I haven't created a component yet, but if you did, it would show up here. Now, for you as content designers or UX writers, if you want to make sure that your designers are using consistent language when they don't have a UX writer in the room, this is something like this is a great way to get them consistent, because again, it's right there in front of them. They have access to it in Figma. So it's an excellent way to make sure that your copy can be consistent. And there we go. So those are some of the basics in terms of collaboration. So I don't know if any other questions have come through while I've been talking.
Yeah. Quick question, Patrick, on the plugin piece. So let's say somebody uses Ditto or another plugin to make a change to the file. Do they need access to the plugins in order to like change those changes?
That's right. Yeah. So they'll need. Well, sorry. Well, you won't need access to the plugin in order to change the changes. But if you wanted to access things like components, or you wanted to access the notes, for instance, and see which copy is. So you would have seen just now I marked copy as work in progress. If you want to see that, yes, you need the plugin as well. Mm-hmm. So you'll need everyone in the organization would need to install it and make sure that they have access to it.
Great. And somebody asked, so let's say you do leave a note for the designer like this, please don't touch this. Where would that show up? As they're hovering over the component, or like, do you know what that looks like?
So in Ditto, they would need to make sure that they have Ditto open and that they would need to see the comment. But again, if you don't have Ditto or any type of plugin, you can literally just create a comment and you can tag the designer. So let's say Carly's the designer. I would say, Carly, please do not touch this. Now, in Carly's view, she should get a notification on her screen. So Carly, did that show up for you as a notification?
It did, yeah.
So do you want to share your screen and then we can see what it looks like when you get that notification? So
sure, yeah, let's share my screen.
And then while Carly's doing that, somebody had asked, speaking of stakeholders, how popular is Figma with people in organizations? Will I mainly be working with UX designers in Figma, or will all be using it, like developers and others?
So I'll get to that in a second, but as you can see here on Carly's screen, all of her comments are coming up where she's been tagged. So she's able to then see that, okay, I won't touch that piece of text.
I won't touch it, but I will lock it so it doesn't move. That's another thing you can do with the layers panel, is you can lock things so you like literally cannot edit them. You can also hide them if you just want to see what it looks like without the button, but let's lock it for now.
Excellent. So regarding the question, how popular is Figma with people in organizations? Well, one of the benefits is that, as we mentioned before, you don't need an account to go in and use it. So if you need to share a file with someone in marketing or an executive who doesn't have Figma, literally we can just send them the link and they can just take a look. That's one of the huge benefits of using a web-based design product like this. It's just really easy to get. It's really easy to get feedback really quickly. So yeah, that's one of the huge benefits. Were there any other questions that came through?
Another thing I'd add is that engineers usually love seeing everything in Figma. It's very helpful for them to grab verbatim copy rather than trying to type it out themselves. So they might be in here. I think that's where the page view comes really in handy. You might want to name a page final or hand off to engineering or something that makes it clear this has been completely copy and design approved, so that when they grab that copy, they don't have to think about it twice. They really can just go in and copy and paste it.
Great. Yeah, Jennifer just left a great comment on the Slack plugin. So she'll get a Figma notification in Slack. And it sounds like a great collaboration plugin for sure. Somebody had asked, if you're collaborating on a multi-screen design that has some text duplicated from screen to screen, is there a way to update all of that text at once, or do you need a plugin in order to do that? So like bulk updates.
That's a plugin.
Yeah.
So yeah, so for instance, with Ditto or strings, you'd be able to create, you'll be able to tag certain elements, and if you can just bulk change things at once. So again, the CTA text is a good example. If you decide as an organization that you want to change all of your learn mores to something else, you can then go and bulk update all of those designs at once.
Yep.
Yeah, so you'll definitely need a plugin for that.
Great. Yeah, lots of plugin questions. So another one, is there an advantage to using Ditto for component matching versus importing component libraries directly into Figma?
Well, the issue with not the issue, the benefit of Ditto is that when we talk about a component in Ditto, you're talking just about text. So I would encourage everyone who's curious about Ditto or strings or Frontitude, which is another text-based plugin, to go and check out those individually, because they'll be able to detail a lot more about what their individual benefits are. There is a question here in the same vein, which is asking, is there a place for design systems or saving libraries? Yes. So Sammie and Carly, I'm betting that you will work regularly with those features all the time. So would either of you like to show where you go to access those types of files?
Sure. Let me see if it's possible with our Writers Collective account, but I can show you the general gist of where you would find anything like that. So do you want me to share my screen, Patrick?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Screen share shuffle.
Great. So when I'm working with a design system, that's, I think, another question here asked about components too and creating components. So say I wanted to make sure our buttons used a specific icon next to them or something like that. I would go up next to the layers panel and click on assets. And here's where you'd find that component library. So there are some built in that are just, I think, iOS basics, anything like that, and others that are specific to your team. So when I'm working on something for Condé Nast, I might have a Vogue library and a Bon Appetit library, and those would house very different iconography, as you can imagine. And this is where I'd pull it from. So it might also have colors and styles. Of course, in our Writers Collective account, we don't really use many components. But something else that is helpful here is that you can turn something into a component. So if you don't have a plugin or tool that you're using to create the same copy everywhere on the screen, what you could do is turn something into a component like this, and then grab that same component and place it anywhere across the screen. So that's almost like a local design system or something that if your team doesn't have set up, if you're just not at that stage, that's something you can create to help yourself out so you never have to recreate this. And then you would just grab those buttons whenever you want to put them on the screen. So you could create send buttons, continue buttons, anything you need, or your team and the larger Figma account might already have that in place for you to pull from. So I find that really helpful. And then most systems that are at that mature stage will also have auto layout set up, which is where when you move, say, this button next to this button, everything will snap into place really neatly. That's also a really helpful, much more advanced tool.
Yeah, and it's a great way. What you just mentioned, Sammie, is a great way to make sure that as a content designer, you have consistent text, even if you're not using a plugin. So yeah, if you're creating buttons with a particular piece of text, you can just include them in that asset library, and then you can make sure that just let all your design team know if you're using a particular button in this context, to use this one, and so on.
Good stuff. We have a few more minutes. Just wanted to quickly cover this question. So it says, our collaborators like legal or support have found Figma disorienting. Are there any tips or plugins to make it easier for teams who aren't familiar with the tool to review content?
Well, the first thing I would say is that if they're finding it disorienting or they're confused by using it, I would say that's a really great opportunity for you to as a content designer, to have a session with those people and explain the basics, just like we're doing here, is to really to really empower them to use the tool. I would say that plugins are great, but it is really good for everyone to know the basics about how Figma is used, because the more empowered they are with the tool itself, the more they're going to become a part of the design process. So I would really encourage you to use that as an opportunity to go and teach them and find out, like, what do they find disorienting? Like, what are their biggest questions they have, and then try and help them. But of course, the plugins we've mentioned can do that. But I would say, yeah, start with actually showing them how do they use it. Sammie and Carly, do you have something to weigh in on there?
I would just say the life raft to always throw someone is that observe tool. So they don't need to navigate themselves. They can just click that one button and then follow exactly what you're doing on the screen. So that really makes it easy for them to get to exactly the same place you are. So it's less about navigating and orientation.
Yeah, or you could even format it in a familiar way. So I know a lot of my legal stakeholders or business stakeholders, we do a lot of PowerPoints, we do a lot of Google slide presentations. So you can actually create like custom frames that are like presentation slide size. And then that's a lot more familiar for them to like visually see, okay, here's what the screen is all about. You can add like those post-it notes or bulleted lists to explain what each screen is.
Another really small tip, and I'll put this one in the chat so everybody has it, but is if you click Command \, that will hide those two panels on either side. So it'll give it a cleaner view. And for stakeholders, if they're in view mode, they won't see those anyway. So if you're presenting, it'll make it less overwhelming, but remember, their view will be much more neat anyway.
Great. Awesome. Well, we are just about out of time, but if we didn't have the chance to answer your question, we will be doing a series of more webinars. So we will definitely get more in the weeds on Figma as we go along. So just wanted to say thank you again to Patrick, Sammie, and Carly for answering all the questions. And if there's anything else y'all want to quickly add, otherwise we will we'll wrap here.
Awesome. Thanks.